Sonya Jakubec.
That's right.
She's an associate professor at Montreal University in Calgary, Canada. Her area of practice is community mental health across the lifespan, with a particular focus on the impact of social determinants of mental health. She has been involved in research in the areas of community mental health services development, crisis mental health, rural mental health issues, nature experience, and mental well-being, and supported recreation in mental health promotion. Sonia? Thank
you very much. It's wonderful to be here, and it's nice to be here as somebody coming from a different field, coming from the field of health. And I really do think that the best hospitals are the Alberta parks, the parks in Australia, the ocean. This is the best medicine. We certainly know this in terms of mental well-being. The effectiveness of a lot of medication is really not well-founded in many regards, and that we have a ready hospital for us. There's a really rich history. I'll kind of cruise back here a little bit. What I want to talk a little bit about today was also on Christian's slide. There was a slide about Alberta Park boundary, and I like this image that we have on this first slide that is the Bow River of Calgary. And the banks of this river expanded quite rapidly. We had a massive flood in Calgary last year. And so when we talk about, we can't really adapt nature, it's what we have to work with, and we have to adapt ourselves and use our people power to make nature accessible. Nature is also changing, and we need to be very concerned and conserve what we do have, because it is rapidly changing. And I think one of the liaisons with my co-researchers, and I want to talk about our joint funding between the Ministry of Tourism, Parks and Recreation, as well as Alberta Addictions and Mental Health. So we have this joint health and research partnership because our interest in conserving our environment and caring for our environment, enjoying our environment and our parks is also essential to our health and the health of our parks. There's this real synergy, and I think it's an interesting combination of funding, an interesting combination of rethinking hospitals, healthcare, and rethinking park and as a place of health and healing as well. So I'll acknowledge those joint funders. I'll also acknowledge the co-authors of this paper that we have published it's a Journal of Research, Social Science and Research for Disabilities, as well as a new publication through the Therapeutic Recreation Association that's just recently coming out this fall. So we'll have those for you to refer on to. But co-authors are Dawn Carruthers-Denhode with Alberta Parks, so that's Christian's boss and colleague of Ken's and mine. Dr. Heather Ray with Physical Education at Mount Royal University, where I teach in Calgary, as well as our statistician, Ashok Krishnamurthy. I also want to acknowledge us collaborators and partners with this project, wherein we were looking at the impacts and what this means. What does it mean that we're including people with disabilities and people of all kinds in our parks? I'd like to acknowledge big partners in this work: the Push to Open Nature Society in Alberta, the Rocky Mountain Adaptive Sports Centre, CRIS Kelowna, which is Community Recreational Initiative Society, Mount Royal University, and Outward Bound. We're all in cahoots with this work, collecting data, being part of setting up the nature experiences that we used as interventions in this study. So before I go into the actual study, I want to talk a bit about the background to this kind of work. And this is a growing field of work. And I've got a little picture here of some kids doing some nature studies. And I think we have a kind of resurgence, a redevelopment and recreation of interest in health and nature and this combination, and in particular mental well-being. We've seen Richard Louve's work in the area of children and attention deficit disorder, and what he coins as nature deficit disorder. So there is this resurgence, but what is a really rich history? A lot of our psychiatric asylums and care facilities used to be out in parks. The Banff National Park was really a place of going to the waters for healing and mental wellness. And we know in France, this is where Van Gogh went to seek asylum and created many of his paintings as well. So there's this really rich ancient history of parks as a place of healing. And it's increasingly being prescribed and studied in this way. So we have a growing body of evidence about the mental well-being effects of participation in parks and being active, as well as passive, just simply being in parks, as we've heard about as well from our other presenters. There's that great study of patients in hospital just looking out a window to a green space or not, and the impacts of recovery from surgery from just looking outside a window. So we know just being in nature, looking out of the car in the national park is still a very healing and great experience. But there's a lot of questions around this area to be discovered yet. So one of them that we took up, and I came to be part of this study with Alberta Parks by being a Sherpa volunteer with the kind of programs that you've just heard about. So I was a Sherpa. I am a skier, backcountry and cross-country skier and hiker, and have enjoyed participating with people of all abilities in the park in this way, and happened to work in one of these adventure weekends with Christian's boss and our colleague Dawn, and I just got talking about the fact that we needed to study this, and I just said, well, you know, this is one of my areas, so let's work on it together. So one of the designs we put together was really this 3-phase study that Alberta Health took up with great interest as well. We undertook an environmental scan, just trying to understand the scope of this kind of study and work and trying to define the topic. We did a pre and post survey of outdoor day trips, as well as pre and post surveys of weekend and week-long trips to look at the mental well-being of this inclusive experience. So we looked at both participants with disabilities of all kinds, cognitive, developmental, physical disabilities, as well as caregivers with an interest in knowledge that people with disabilities and caregivers have disproportionate amounts of mental health issues, depression in particular, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress. So the data that we collected was both qualitative. We did individual and group interviews for our environmental scan, looking at 4 caregivers and 4 adults with disabilities. We did observations and reflective writing for both the pre and post survey experiences as well, to capture that qualitative data and understand the meaning of the data. The survey data we looked at was a nature inclusion survey based on a previous recreation study completed, and mental health impact assessment tools. So we undertook quality of life inventory, standardized tools in this way, as well as the Beck depression inventory. And our analysis included basic descriptive statistics of those survey works, as well as thematic analysis. So in these different phases, we, again, just to give you a little sense of the sites and the participants, in our environmental scan, we looked at 8 participants with in-depth individual interviews, which we undertook at an urban park, actually, so during a walking experience. And in the second phase of the day trips, we have 35 adults of mixed abilities, again, caregivers and adults of mixed disabilities. And phase 3 were front and backcountry weekend and weekend-long trips. We had a participant group of 35, again, adults, all between the ages of 18 and 66. And I'll tell you a little bit more about those participants as we go along here. Just focusing in on the results, because that's what matters most, and I think is what lends meaning for both advocating for services, for the kind of position that we have with Christian here with Alberta Parks, to really look at what does this mean for people. And in the environmental scan, we found that we looked at address the benefits and barriers in particular. Key benefits of nature experiences and inclusion for caregivers and participants with disabilities was a sense of calm for both populations, being challenged to try new things, a sense of increased happiness, and what we heard throughout was a sense of equalizing and normalizing experiences for people. Some of the key barriers we heard about in that scan were really about willingness, and particularly the willingness of caregivers. And it wasn't so much institutional boundaries around safety and so on. We thought that would be the key concern. The key concern was just simply interest and willingness for caregivers, that the effort that might take. For many of the caregivers we heard from, that it was just easier to go to take their people they were caring for to the mall, the shopping mall, to walk around the mall. Of interest there for us. Some of that willingness had to do, pardon me, in Canada with the weather, and in Calgary it happened when we did this scan. It was also a really difficult weather situation. So what I want to focus on in terms of our results from the overall 3 phases of study is our qualitative data initially, and then we'll look at our statistics. And so what we found is experiences of inclusion in nature for both caregivers and adults with disabilities. Key themes were around sensory activation. That was our kind of most dominant theme. A sense of reimagined social relations, as well as our sense of reinvented self is how people talked about their experience. So in terms of this most dominant theme, the sensory activation, we really heard about this theme about activation of the senses from inclusion in nature to do with the being in place, of sitting by the water, of touching caves, watching my wheelchair on the shore. Hearing the crunch of leaves makes me feel like a kid again, we heard. My food tastes better while sitting by the lake. You know, we heard this very sensory experience from people, having to do with the place and the spaces they were in. Also of the activities they were included in. Playing, this experience of being playful again, playing in the leaves. Others commented on what they witnessed of those they were caring for. For instance, my daughter is so much calmer, even weeks after we get outside, this sense of calm from the activity. In terms of the second main theme, and again, we have some more information for you around this analysis and accounts in our papers, so you can refer back to those. A second theme around reimagined social relations, and we talked about this in terms of the environmental scan as well. People speaking about a shifting of and more equalizing relationship. And I think that's something that we certainly see when we're out in nature. Everybody's dealing with the same challenges, the same weather challenges. That rock face is the same rock face for everybody. People spoke about seeing themselves, their relationship differently. For instance here, watching my daughter feel so free somehow makes me feel free too. Another family member acknowledged that she could see her husband in a new way through the experience of a very extreme challenge. I didn't even realize my husband, was as contented as he is. I don't have to worry so much about him. So this real shift in how people could see their relations to each other. Their relationship to place and space was also described as quite reimagined through their experiences in nature, facilitated by nature. Nature is in charge, is what we heard about from many of our participants. Several of our participants also described an equalizing experience about nature being in charge and being able to take a break from their usual roles or routines in care facilities, for instance. That this break in terms of the place and their experience and relationship with each other was really adjusted by getting out of the 4 walls, for instance, of a care facility. Many of our participants also expressed that inclusion in nature enabled new experiences that gave them a different power relationship to each other, but also to the environment itself. So another dominant theme in our qualitative analysis was around a reinvention, a sense of oneself. And this overlaps similarly with the other previous themes as well. People spoke about a changed sense of time and timelessness in their experience in nature. First of all, wanting more time was a very dominant theme. Everybody just wanted more and more and more. And we just heard this endlessly, to the point that sometimes that experience was just like a little teaser for many participants, and that they really just did want more time. It's changed a different experience of their sense of weight and weightlessness. And again, we heard from one participant, the week in the backcountry felt like it evaporated. Even though many things were really hard, it all went too fast. For many of our participants, a sense of free and playful quality of the nature activity was highlighted. In my usual everyday work, this is a caregiver's account, every second counts, but today, with only the agenda of hiking together, I could just go with the flow. So we really could see some very powerful statements in our thematic analysis. In terms of the statistical analysis, we don't have any statistics. This was a very small sample. We don't have statistical results for you, statistically significant results. However, we have a lot to share with you as well, and I think some very powerful accounts here. So in the first survey, we looked at this health and well-being impact questionnaire. We collected some stats that have some just general bar charts and graphs. We completed a Beck depression inventory, as I say, and a quality of life inventory. So I'll just summarize these results briefly. I know we're short of time. So in terms of our Beck depression inventory, some fairly important results here in that at our sort of pre-test before the day-long and week-long experiences, and we didn't see any distinction between the length of time that people were out, it didn't seem to matter. That we really saw reports of moderate symptoms of depression for across the board as a general rule for our participants. And that changed when post experience. These post results were completed a week after the nature experience to witnessing no to mild symptoms in that depression inventory. So some fairly important results for us around depression here. In terms of quality of life, we saw increased health satisfaction. And I don't think this is going to be surprising for many people that enjoy nature and being outside. Increased social relationships and love accounts, as well as satisfaction with experiences of community and helping. And I think that, again, fits with this sort of inclusive experience. So these aren't surprising results. Where we did see some surprises was, 1 minute, I'll be really quick to summarize this. We really saw some areas where there was no change, in fact, a little decrease in some areas, and it was interesting. It was around the playfulness, creativity, and we took these results back to our participants to try to understand, wow, you've had this experience in nature, and here you are post-experience. What's a change? What can we account for this? What would be decreasing that experience? And many said it was because of this desire to want more experience in nature, that this was really just a little teaser, and I've just had this experience, and now I'm going to be back in the care facility. Or now I have to go back to my workaday life. It's like, I just want more. And I think most of us that love skiing or nature or hiking can relate to that experience. So just to quickly summarize and discuss our next steps, we have participated in this work in a number of knowledge translation kind of and sharing activities. Firstly, back to Alberta Parks and Alberta Health, where we're beginning to see create a position that Christian is holding now as an inclusive Parks project coordinator to really support this work, and as well to look at supporting this work more from the health and wellness perspective as well, and financing in that way, and really begin to see some joint funding. And I'm hearing from our colleague in Australia here that there is that work of joining our funding and joining our forces in this work. What it has done, what our study has done, is really affirmed our model of working across sectors like this, and how important that is. One of the things we have done is appointed Dawn, who's working with Christian in Parks, as an associate professor in nursing at our university. So I think something really interesting is happening there, that we're beginning to mix our worlds a little bit better and really observe this hospital that we have, this care facility, this recreation and therapy facility that is at our doorstep. We want to further test these measures. We have a new study in place that's looking at end of life and parks inclusion as well. So that's our latest venture happening right now. So there's a lot of different populations and studies to proceed from. So we have lots of interesting references for you. We have our own publications that I think can attach to the meaning of this work. I'm happy to share those citations with you so that you can advance your own work in this area as well. And I'll just end off with a couple pictures of our participants here, and open to any questions.
You have a question for Sonya? Me, I have a comment. Usually when we talk about outdoor activities or leisure, we're thinking about the physical health benefits. I like you introduce a larger vision of what health is.
Thanks. And I think, well, we were talking here with Ken in Australia that both the mental well-being, post-traumatic stress concerns for our veterans have raised this issue of nature inclusion and mental well-being really to the fore. There's a lot of new studies in that area. The obesity concerns and epidemic and that overlap with our mental well-being is also raising this overlap. So we really can't separate these physical health, nature, and our mental status. So
I've got a question. It's Bill Forrester from Travelability. It's a question for virtually everybody on the panel, and I'm going to rope the girl from Tourism Alberta into the same question. We've got some really good worldwide academic research on health and well-being. We've got some really good academic research on tourism patterns for people with disabilities. We've got innovation coming out in pockets. We've got new equipment, and we know about the aspirations. When, I was going to start with the academic thing, when is the academic going to transcend into tourism courses, into finance courses, and then transcend across into something that ought to be marketed? Because if you look at Alberta, as we said in earlier sessions this week, you've got the Icefield Parkway. We've already seen there are probably a dozen top inclusive attractions. You've now got the outdoors available, but nobody is coordinating that into a package to market. I'd like some comments from both the academic world of how you translate that into your academic courses, from Tourism Alberta on how you then get hold of that, and then how you meld the whole lot together.
One of the things we've identified is that, yeah, as a government agency, we need to facilitate people coming to the parks, but we're not about guiding them through the parks or, like you said, creating that package. So we're working with companies like Chris Kelowna, who are working with us to sort of build these packages safely, market them. Sort of we support them, and we put the golden stamp on it that you could then get an inquiry from an individual about accessing the park, going on a guided tour, as would an able-bodied person. There's mountain guides for everybody. You climb Everest, you get a guide. So it would be directing people towards various organizations that are then capable of taking them on these trips and are familiar with all the research, all the studies, and so on and so forth.
yeah, I think in terms of crossing our sectors, we're beginning to do this. You're hearing about this with health and with Alberta Parks as sort of those two sectors co-financing these studies. I've just been talking with our colleagues from Chris Kelowna about some of my academic friends that are working in phys ed and outdoor leadership and tourism. So I think we're beginning to make these nudgings, right? It's I think I agree. It's that boundary, that park boundary, that picture that we saw at the beginning, that we need to kind of blur those boundaries a little bit. We need to blur who's doing what and this sort of disciplinary structure that we have. I think it's beginning. We need to see more of this. We need Dawn to be an associate professor or an adjunct professor in nursing, and I need to work more with parks. These are the kind of overlaps that we're just nudging towards. It's what needs to happen. We need to include industry in that, as you say. So, thanks.
I think just to, it's Bill, is your name, Bill? Just to add to that comment, I think with all the amazing ideas and innovations that we've seen happening and the stories we've heard about what's going on, TED Talks, I don't know if any of these presentations have been given on TED Talks, but if they have been, I think we'd all love to know that they're available. And if they haven't, I'd love to see some of them out there, because I think that would be a great way to share the information. For people who aren't familiar with that, TED Talks, I think it's Technology, Education, and Design. Is that right? And it's available online. So just a comment.
Sorry. No, it's great. No, yes.
Look, I think that's a great idea. Just one matter I forgot to mention when I was presenting is that Parks Victoria developed a manual for its park rangers on compiling park access information for visitors with disabilities and other requirements. I've got a copy of it here, and if you're interested in looking at it, it's a valuable resource for our park rangers in compiling park access information for visitors who are wanting to know how accessible the sites are so they can plan their trip. So I just thought I'd mention that, so thank you.
I just wanted to go back to respond to Bill's question on the tourism side. As I mentioned, I work for the Alberta government in the tourism side of formerly Tourism, Parks and Recreation. They've now split us. We don't have it currently as accessibility as a specific project that we're going after. It's something that I want to change. It's something that I've been working on for a while. But we know that there are these innovative experiences and tour operators out there. There are missing links, as I've had discussions with other Albertans who are here. How do we overcome that before we're market ready? Before we can put it out there that you can come and have these experiences, we want to make sure that all of the pieces to the puzzle are there so that we're not missing the mark or setting expectations that are not there. But something that's unique about Alberta, or something that I love about Alberta, is how innovative we are. So we see a problem, we try and fix it, hence the apparatus you see up front there. So we welcome that from tour operators. We know we have other transportation providers here who saw that need, like I mentioned in my presentation yesterday, and filled that gap. So it's just a matter of finding out where they are. One thing I'm taking back from this conference is we're developing a report based on what we've heard here, what the best practices are, and sending it up to our minister so that she can hear what's going on and what we can do moving forward to make Alberta more accessible.
Hi, it's again me, Antje. Today I'm actually here for the European Travel Commission, but also I work for the German National Tourist Board. So just to quickly also get back to your question, I think that a number of countries are maybe already a step ahead. So basically in Germany, our government brought everyone together on a table, and we had everyone included from the different states. We had tour operators, we had different associations from different needs that people have. And out of that, they actually developed guidelines and what we need to do in order to make tourism better for everyone. And I actually think Germany is a really, really good example for not being there, of course. Maybe out of 10 steps, we have reached 3, but actually we were able to bring everyone already together on a table, but that was initiated by the government. And I always think it needs to be, one person head, on the very, very top level that needs to bring everyone together, unfortunately.